Homeless man and dog lived under a bridge until a viral video revealed who they really were. The moment that changed everything. The camera was shaking. Someone's phone, held by trembling hands, captured what appeared to be just another sad scene on the edge of the city. A homeless man sat beneath the concrete arch of the old railway bridge, his weathered face barely visible in the dim morning light. Beside him, a large German shepherd lay protectively close, its brown eyes watching every passing car with careful attention. But then something happened that made the person filming gasp audibly on the video. The dog suddenly stood up, positioned itself between the man and an approaching stranger, and did something that would later cause millions of people around the world to stop scrolling and start watching. Within 48 hours, that 15-second clip had been viewed over 20 million times. Comments flooded in from every corner of the internet. People were crying, sharing, demanding answers. Who was this man? Who was this dog? And what was the incredible story behind what the camera had captured? The truth, when it finally emerged, was more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. Under the bridge, where their story began. For nearly 8 months, the man and the dog had called the space beneath the Henderson Street Bridge their home. It wasn't much, a concrete alcove barely large enough for both of them to lie down, protected from the worst of the rain, but open to the cold winds that swept through during winter nights. Local residents had grown accustomed to seeing them. The man, who appeared to be in his 50s with a thick gray beard and clothes that had seen far better days, rarely spoke to anyone. He would sit quietly for hours, sometimes reading old newspapers he found in nearby trash bins, sometimes simply staring at the river that flowed sluggishly beneath the bridge. The dog was always there, always watching, always protective. I used to walk past them every morning on my way to work, recalled Jennifer Martinez, who lived 3 blocks away. At first, I was a little scared of the dog. He was big, you know, but I noticed he never barked, never showed aggression. He just watched, like he was guarding something precious. Other neighbors remembered small details, how the man would always feed the dog first, even when he clearly had very little food for himself. How he would use his own jacket to keep the animal warm on particularly cold nights. How the two of them seemed to communicate without words, moving in perfect synchronization as if they'd been together for decades. They weren't just man and dog, said Paul Richardson, who owned a convenience store nearby. They were partners. You could see it in how they looked at each other. The video that broke the internet. On a Tuesday morning in late September, college student Marcus Webb was walking to his early class when he noticed a commotion near the bridge. A man he didn't recognize was approaching the homeless man aggressively, shouting something about his spot and demanding money. Marcus instinctively pulled out his phone and started recording, worried the situation might turn violent. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but would be analyzed frame by millions of viewers. As the aggressive stranger moved closer, the German shepherd stood up, but instead of barking or showing teeth, the dog positioned itself calmly but firmly between the two men. Then, in a series of precise, deliberate movements, the dog performed what any trained professional would immediately recognize as advanced protection protocols used by elite security and military working dogs. The movements were too precise to be accidental, too professional to be natural instinct. This was a highly trained animal executing procedures that took years of specialized training to perfect. The aggressive man backed away immediately, hands raised, suddenly aware he was dealing with something far beyond a typical stray dog. But it was what happened next that truly captured the world's attention. After the threat had passed, the dog turned back to the homeless man and performed a series of specific checks, nosing his hands, checking his pulse points, watching his breathing. These were medical alert behaviors, the kind trained service dogs perform for handlers with serious health conditions. Who was this man, And who was this extraordinary dog? If this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes the most powerful truths are hidden in the most unexpected places. The investigation began. The video exploded across social media platforms. Within hours, it had been shared by celebrities, news outlets, and animal advocacy groups. The comment sections were filled with theories, questions, and an overwhelming desire to know more. Local news station KTLA was the first to send a reporter to the bridge. By the time journalist Sarah Chen arrived with her cameraman, a small crowd had already gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man and dog who had captured the internet's imagination. They found them in their usual spot, apparently unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Sarah approached slowly, respectfully, explaining that she just wanted to talk. The man was initially reluctant, his eyes showing the wariness of someone who had learned to distrust sudden attention. But the dog remained calm, which seemed to reassure him. "I don't want any trouble," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "We just want to be left alone." "I understand," Sarah replied gently, "but people are concerned. That video, your dog performed movements that suggest professional training, military or police training. People want to know your story." The man was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on dog's fur. Finally, he spoke words that would become the opening to one of the most remarkable human interest stories of the year. "His name is Ranger, and yes, he was a military working dog, one of the best." Sarah's cameraman, sensing the importance of the moment, quietly began recording. "And you?" Sarah asked. Thomas took a deep breath. "My name is Thomas Brennan, Master Sergeant Thomas Brennan, U.S. Army, retired, and this is my service dog. We served together in Afghanistan." The story behind the story. Over the next several hours, sitting beneath that bridge while the autumn sun traced patterns across the concrete, Thomas Brennan told his story. He had enlisted in the Army at 19, following a family tradition that stretched back 3 generations. Over 23 years of service, he had been deployed 7 times to combat zones, rising through the ranks to become a respected NCO and combat medic. It was during his final deployment to Afghanistan that he met Ranger. The dog had been assigned to his unit as an explosives detection dog, trained to locate IEDs and other threats. From the first day, Thomas and Ranger formed an unusual bond. Typically, working military dogs are handled by specialized canine units, but circumstances in their deployment meant Thomas and Ranger worked together frequently. "He saved my life," Thomas said simply, "more than once. There was this one time we were on patrol and Ranger suddenly sat down. That's the alert signal for explosives. We stopped the entire column. Turned out there were 3 IEDs buried in the road ahead. If we'd taken 5 more steps..." He trailed off, his hand tightening on Ranger's fur. But the story took a darker turn. During a firefight in his final month of deployment, Thomas was injured by shrapnel from an RPG. The physical wounds eventually healed, but the invisible injuries, the traumatic brain injury, the PTSD, the depression, those proved much harder to overcome. When he returned stateside, Thomas found himself struggling with a reality that many veterans know all too well. The transition to civilian life was overwhelming. Crowds made him anxious, loud noises triggered panic attacks. The purpose and structure that had defined his life for 2 decades was suddenly gone, replaced by a confusing world that seemed to move too fast and make too little sense. His marriage fell apart, jobs became impossible to hold, friends and family, well-meaning but unable to truly understand, gradually drifted away. Within 2 years of his honorable discharge, Thomas found himself homeless. "I wasn't handling it well," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I was angry at everything, at myself mostly. I'd survived combat, survived injuries, survived things that should have killed me, and I was defeated by normal life, by peace. The challenges our veterans face don't end when they come home. If you know a veteran struggling with the transition to civilian life, reach out. Sometimes just knowing someone cares can make all the difference. Organizations like the Wounded Warrior Project and the Veterans Crisis Line are available 24/7. Ranger's choice. But Thomas's story wasn't finished because there was still Ranger to account for. After Thomas's discharge, Ranger had continued serving in the canine unit. Military working dogs often serve with multiple handlers over their careers, but something was different with Ranger. He became increasingly difficult to work with, refusing commands from new handlers, showing signs of depression and anxiety. Dogs bond with their handlers, explained Dr. Rebecca Foster, a veterinary behaviorist who later
He had disappeared into the invisible population of homeless veterans living on the streets and under bridges across America. No current address, phone disconnected, no contact with family members who might know his location. For 6 months, the military and various veteran advocacy organizations searched. They were about to give up when a social worker in Los Angeles thought she might have spotted someone matching Thomas's description at a downtown shelter. By the time they tracked down the lead, Thomas had already left, but they were getting closer. Finally, on a cold March morning, a veteran outreach worker named David Rodriguez was making his rounds under the bridges near downtown LA. And there, sitting alone with a 1,000-yard stare, was Thomas Brennan. "I told him I had something for him," David recalled. "He didn't believe me at first, said he didn't need charity, didn't want pity. But then I told him it wasn't charity, it was a reunion." When David brought Ranger around the corner, both dog and man froze. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ranger's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. He pulled against the leash, whining with an urgency David had never heard from the typically stoic military dog. Thomas dropped to his knees. "Ranger?" he whispered. "Is that really you, boy?" The dog broke free and covered the distance between them in seconds. What happened next made David, a decorated veteran himself who had seen plenty of combat, openly weep. "I've never seen anything like it," David said later. They held on to each other. Thomas was crying, Ranger was making these sounds I didn't know dogs could make. It was pure joy, pure recognition, pure love. Starting over together. That reunion had been 18 months before the viral video. Since then, Thomas and Ranger had been inseparable. They had spent much of that time living under the Henderson Street Bridge, but they weren't merely surviving, they were slowly healing. Ranger, it turned out, wasn't just a companion, he was a lifeline. As a trained military working dog, Ranger had instincts and training that translated perfectly into service dog work. He could sense when Thomas was about to have a panic attack and would apply pressure therapy, leaning his weight against Thomas to ground him. He would wake Thomas from nightmares. He would position himself as a buffer in crowds, giving Thomas space. "He's the reason I'm still here," Thomas said during that first interview. "There were dark days when I thought about ending it, but I couldn't leave him. He needed me, and I needed to be the person he thought I was." Living on the streets with a dog presented challenges, of course. Thomas always made sure Ranger ate first, even if it meant he went hungry. He protected the dog from the cold, the rain, the dangers of street life. In return, Ranger protected Thomas, not just from physical threats, but from the invisible enemies that haunted his mind. "They saved each other," Sarah Chen observed in her news report. "This isn't just a story about a homeless veteran and his dog. It's a story about loyalty, love, and the bonds that give us reasons to keep fighting." The world responds. After Sarah's initial report aired on KTLA, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The station was flooded with calls and emails from viewers wanting to help. Within 24 hours, a GoFundMe campaign launched by a local veterans organization had raised over $50,000. But Thomas was hesitant about accepting help. Years of struggle had made him wary of charity, suspicious of attention, uncomfortable with being seen as a victim needing rescue. "I don't want people's pity," Thomas told Sarah in a follow-up interview. "Ranger and I, we've managed, we get by." "This isn't pity," Sarah replied gently. "This is gratitude. You served your country for 23 years. You saved lives. People want to honor that service by helping you get back on your feet." What finally changed Thomas's mind was Ranger. A veterinarian who saw the news report reached out to examine Ranger free of charge. The assessment revealed that while the dog was generally healthy, he was showing signs of hip dysplasia, a common condition in German Shepherds, especially those who've had the physically demanding career of a military working dog. Without treatment, the condition would worsen, eventually causing Ranger significant pain. The estimated cost of treatment, $3,500. "That was the moment I realized my pride was hurting him," Thomas said. "I couldn't provide for him the way he deserved, so I had to swallow my ego and accept help." Pride can be a prison, especially when it prevents us from accepting the help we need. If you're struggling with homelessness, with mental health, with any challenge that feels insurmountable, please remember that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. A new beginning. The support that poured in for Thomas and Ranger went far beyond the initial GoFundMe campaign. A local apartment complex owned by a veteran who had seen the story offered Thomas a studio apartment rent-free for 1 year. A national pet supply company provided Ranger with a lifetime supply of high-quality dog food and covered all his medical expenses. Job offers came in from across the country. But perhaps most importantly, Thomas connected with a network of veteran support organizations specializing in PTSD and transition services. For the first time since his discharge, he began receiving comprehensive mental health care specifically tailored to his experiences and needs. "The thing about PTSD," explained Dr. James Morrison, a psychologist specializing in veteran mental health, "is that it's not a character flaw or sign of weakness. It's an injury, just as real as a broken bone or shrapnel wound. And like any injury, it needs proper treatment to heal." With stable housing, regular therapy, and Ranger always by his side, Thomas began the slow process of rebuilding his life. He started volunteering at a local veterans center, using his own experience to help other veterans navigate the complex systems of support and care. His story and his willingness to share it honestly made him uniquely effective at reaching veterans who had given up hope. "When Thomas talks to guys who are living on the streets, they listen," Maria Gonzalez, director of the Veterans Center, said. "Because he's been there, he understands. And seeing him with Ranger, seeing that bond, it shows them that recovery is possible, that life can get better." The power of connection. 6 months after the viral video, Sarah Chen did a follow-up report. She found Thomas and Ranger thriving in their small apartment, which Thomas had furnished simply but comfortably. Photos from his military service hung on the walls. Ranger had a comfortable bed in the corner, though he still preferred sleeping next to Thomas's bed, ever the faithful guardian. But the most remarkable change was in Thomas himself. The haunted look had faded from his eyes. He smiled more easily. He talked about the future with hope rather than dread. "I'm not going to say everything is perfect," Thomas said to Sarah. "I still have bad days. The PTSD doesn't just disappear. But now I have support systems in place. I have people I can call. I have Ranger, and I have purpose again." That purpose had expanded beyond just volunteering. Thomas had started a nonprofit organization called Ranger's Promise, dedicated to reuniting retired military working dogs with their former handlers. He knew firsthand the healing power of that reunion and wanted to facilitate it for other veterans. There are thousands of veterans out there struggling, and there are hundreds of retired military working dogs who could provide the kind of support and companionship that literally saves lives. We need to bring them together. The organization started small, but grew rapidly, supported by donations from people who had followed Thomas and Ranger's story.
Within its first year, Ranger's Promise successfully reunited 47 retired military working dogs with their former handlers. "Every single one of those reunions is a miracle," Thomas said, his voice filled with emotion. "Every single one is a life potentially saved, because that's what Ranger did for me. He saved my life, and he continues to save it every single day."
The viral video's true legacy. Looking back, that 15-second video captured far more than just a protective dog and his homeless handler. It captured a moment that would spark a national conversation about veteran homelessness, about PTSD, about the bonds between humans and animals, and about the second chances we all deserve. The video had been shared over 50 million times across various platforms, but more importantly, it had inspired action. Donations to veteran organizations spiked in the weeks following the story breaking. Volunteer applications at homeless shelters increased. Adoption rates for large dogs, often overlooked in favor of smaller, easier breeds, jumped significantly. Thomas and Ranger's story reminded people that every homeless person they pass on the street has a story, reflected Sarah Chen. They're not statistics or problems to be solved. They're individuals who faced challenges, often after giving so much in service to others. The story also highlighted a harsh reality. America has thousands of homeless veterans, many of them struggling with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and the difficulty of transitioning from military to civilian life. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, approximately 37,000 veterans experience homelessness on any given night. Many more are precariously housed or at risk of becoming homeless. These are men and women who served their country, who face dangers most of us can't imagine, now struggling to survive on the streets. "We send these young people into war zones," Thomas said in a speech at a veteran advocacy conference. "We train them to be warriors, to face death, to make split-second life or death decisions. Then we bring them home and expect them to just adjust, to become civilians again as if they can just flip a switch. It doesn't work that way." His advocacy work, born from his own experiences, began pushing for better transition programs for veterans leaving military service, better mental health resources, better support for those struggling with PTSD, and better programs to connect veterans with service animals who could provide the kind of support Ranger had given him. Where they are now. 2 years after the viral video, Thomas and Ranger are still together, still inseparable. Thomas has been hired as a full-time director of veteran outreach by the organization where he initially volunteered. He speaks regularly at schools, community centers, and veteran events, sharing his story and advocating for those still struggling. Ranger, now 11 years old, has slowed down a bit. The hip surgery was successful, but age catches up with even the strongest soldiers. He still accompanies Thomas everywhere, still watches over him with those intelligent brown eyes, still provides the emotional support that keeps the worst of the PTSD symptoms at bay. "He's getting older," Thomas acknowledged in a recent interview. "Dogs don't live as long as we do, and that's something I struggle with. But I'm grateful for every day I have with him. He gave me my life back. The least I can do is make sure his final years are comfortable and filled with love." Thomas has also reconnected with his family. His ex-wife, who had watched his descent into homelessness with helpless frustration, was one of the first people to reach out after seeing the viral video. While they haven't reconciled romantically, they've rebuilt a friendship. His 2 adult children, whom he hadn't seen in 3 years, are back in his life. They visit regularly, and they've formed their own bonds with Ranger. Dad's still Dad. The PTSD hasn't magically disappeared, but he's getting help now. He's stable, he's present, and a lot of that is because of Ranger. That dog brought our father back to us. If this story has moved you, consider taking action. Donate to veteran organizations in your community, volunteer at a homeless shelter, or simply take a moment to thank a veteran for their service. Small actions create ripples that can change lives. Lessons from Under the Bridge. The story of Thomas and Ranger teaches us several powerful truths.
First, it reminds us that every person we encounter has a story. The homeless man under the bridge wasn't just a homeless man. He was a decorated veteran, a combat medic who had saved lives, a man who had given over 2 decades of his life in service to his country. We often make snap judgments about people based on their current circumstances, never knowing the full story of how they got there. Second, it demonstrates the incredible healing power of the human-animal bond. Ranger didn't just provide companionship to Thomas, he provided purpose, structure, and unconditional love at a time when Thomas had lost faith in himself and the world. That bond literally saved Thomas's life. Third, it highlights the ongoing crisis of veteran homelessness and PTSD. Thomas's story isn't unique. Thousands of veterans are struggling right now, often invisible to the society they once protected. They need and deserve our support, not our judgment. Fourth, it shows us that it's never too late for a second chance. Thomas had lost everything: his career, his family, his home, his sense of self. But with the right support, with Ranger by his side, he was able to rebuild. Recovery is possible, even when things seem hopeless. Finally, it reminds us of the power of viral media when used for good. That 15-second video could have been just another piece of forgotten content lost in the endless scroll of social media. Instead, it became a catalyst for change, bringing help to someone who desperately needed it and inspiring thousands to take action. The ongoing journey. Thomas is careful to point out that his story isn't finished. Recovery from PTSD isn't a destination, it's an ongoing journey. He still has difficult days, he still struggles with crowds, with loud noises, with the invisible scars that combat left on his psyche. People see where I am now and they think everything's fixed, but that's not how it works. I'm managing my condition, I'm living with it, but it's something I'll deal with for the rest of my life. What has changed is that he now has tools to cope, support systems in place, and most importantly, hope for the future. And through it all, Ranger remains his constant companion, his anchor, his reminder that he's not fighting alone. He's more than a dog, Thomas said, running his hand over Ranger's graying muzzle. He's my brother in arms, my therapist, my reason to get up in the morning. He's the best friend I've ever had, and I'm going to make sure his final years are as good as I possibly can make them. A message of hope. If there's one thing Thomas wants people to take away from his story, it's this: no matter how dark things get, there's always hope. Even when you're living under a bridge with nothing but a loyal dog by your side, even when you've lost everything and can't see a way forward, change is possible. I was convinced I was beyond help. I thought my life was over, that I'd broken something inside myself that couldn't be fixed, but I was wrong. With help, with support, with Ranger refusing to let me give up, I found my way back. He paused, looking at Ranger, who gazed back with absolute devotion. If you're struggling, if you're a veteran dealing with PTSD, if you're homeless and have lost hope, please know that you're not alone. There are people who want to help, organizations dedicated to supporting veterans, and sometimes there's a dog waiting somewhere that could change your life, just like Ranger changed mine. The bridge today. The Henderson Street Bridge still stands, of course. Cars still rumble across it daily. The river still flows beneath it. But it's different now. Someone has painted a mural on one of the concrete supports, a portrait of a soldier and a German shepherd standing together. Below it, in carefully stenciled letters, are the words, "No veteran left behind." Thomas visits sometimes, usually with Ranger. He stands in the spot where they used to sleep, remembering the dark days, but also remembering that those days led to where he is now. I'm not ashamed of the time I spent here. It was part of my journey, part of my story. And maybe, just maybe, my story can help someone else who's going through their own darkness. That 15-second viral video changed Thomas's life, but more importantly, Thomas and Ranger's story has changed countless other lives. Veterans who found hope in their journey, families who better understand PTSD, and regular people who learn to look at homelessness with more compassion and less judgment. A man and his dog lived under a bridge. The world scrolled past them countless times, unseeing, until one video changed everything. But the real story isn't about the video going viral. It's about loyalty that transcends species, about bonds forged in combat that nothing can break, about second chances and the power of unconditional love, about remembering that behind every face on the street is a human being with dignity, with a story, with worth. It's about a soldier and his dog reunited against all odds, reminding us what truly matters in this world. Thomas Brennan continues his advocacy work for homeless veterans and military working dog adoption programs. Rangers Promise has reunited over 200 retired military working dogs with their former handlers. If you would like to support this important work, or if you're a veteran in need of assistance, resources are available through the Veterans Crisis Line at 988, then press 1, the Wounded Warrior Project, and the VA's National Center on Homelessness Among Veterans. Share this story. You never know who might need to hear it today.